Did you know that the very first voice you hear in Sunset Boulevard belongs to a dead man floating face down in a swimming pool? That is not a joke. That is literally how this movie begins. A corpse tells you his own murder story, and somehow that strange, haunting choice turned a dark Hollywood tale into one of the greatest films ever made. Buckle up, because the story behind this movie is even stranger than the movie itself. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Sunset Boulevard. Number 20. The studio almost killed the movie before it started. Here is something that will surprise you. Sunset Boulevard almost never got made. Not because of money problems or scheduling issues. It almost died because the people who ran Hollywood were terrified of it. When director Billy Wilder first started talking about this story, a story about a faded, forgotten movie star who lives in a crumbling mansion and slowly loses her mind, the powerful people inside the film industry felt deeply uncomfortable. And when powerful people feel uncomfortable, they usually try to stop things. Billy Wilder had already made some remarkable films by this point. He made Double Indemnity in 1944, and that film showed the world that Hollywood could tell dark, dangerous stories. Then he made The Lost Weekend in 1945, a brutal story about alcoholism that nobody wanted to make. That film won the Academy Award for Best Picture. So Wilder had earned some respect. But Sunset Boulevard was different. This was not just dark. This was a story that pointed a finger directly at Hollywood itself. It said that the movie business chews people up and throws them away. It said that fame is a kind of madness. It said that the studios make stars and then forget them without a second thought. Louis B. Mayer, who was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood at the time, watched an early screening of the film and became absolutely furious. He reportedly walked straight up to Billy Wilder after the screening and told him in very colorful language that Wilder had disgraced the industry that had given him a home. Mayer felt the film was a betrayal. He thought it made Hollywood look cruel and hollow. And in many ways, he was right. That was exactly the point. Wilder did not flinch. He did not apologize. He believed every frame of that movie was honest, and he stood by it with full confidence. What is remarkable is that the film was released anyway, and it went on to be nominated for 11 Academy Awards. The very thing that powerful men tried to silence became a permanent part of film history. What looked like a threat to Hollywood became one of Hollywood's proudest achievements. That is quite a twist. What they tried to bury, the world chose to celebrate. Number 19. The real Sunset Boulevard Street was used as a character. Most people think of Sunset Boulevard as just the title of the film. But the actual street, the real road that winds through Los Angeles and into Beverly Hills, was treated almost like a living character in the movie. Billy Wilder wanted to use real locations as much as possible. He believed that if you film on real streets, in real places, the audience feels something true, even if they cannot explain exactly why. The street itself has a strange personality. It is glamorous and crumbling at the same time. You can drive down it and pass enormous mansions sitting right next to forgotten buildings, faded signs, and overgrown gardens. There is something melancholy about it, something beautiful and sad all at once. Wilder saw that quality and used it brilliantly. He wanted the audience to feel that the whole world of the film existed in this strange in-between place, not quite alive, not quite dead. The opening scenes of the movie, where the camera glides down the street and we see the name painted on the curb, were filmed on location. The crew worked in the early morning hours when the street was quiet and empty. That emptiness was intentional. Wilder wanted the street to feel like a ghost town, even though during the day it would have been full of cars and people and noise. By filming at dawn, before the world woke up, he captured something that felt haunted. There is a detail that most viewers miss completely. When the narration begins, the camera is looking down at the street from above, almost like we are watching from heaven, or from the perspective of someone who has already left the world behind. That camera angle was not an accident. It was a carefully planned choice to immediately put the audience in the right emotional state. You are watching a world that has already ended. You just do not know it yet. The street gave the movie its soul. It was not just a backdrop. It was a mirror held up to the city itself, and the city did not always like what it saw. The road had a story long before the cameras arrived. Number 18. Gloria Swanson was living a version of the role. Here is a fact that makes everything about this film feel 10 times more powerful. Gloria Swanson, the actress who played Norma Desmond, the forgotten silent film star, was herself a forgotten silent film star. She had been one of the biggest names in Hollywood during the 1920s. She was glamorous, powerful, and adored. Then sound came to cinema. Talkies changed everything. And like so many silent stars, Swanson's career faded. By the time Billy Wilder cast her in Sunset Boulevard, Swanson had not made a film in years. She was living quietly, largely out of the spotlight. When Wilder approached her for the role, he was not just offering her a part in a movie. He was essentially asking her to look directly at her own life and turn it into art. That takes a particular kind of courage. Many actors would have said no. Many would have found it too painful, too exposing, too close to home. Swanson said yes, and her performance became legendary. There are moments in the film, moments where Norma Desmond talks about her fans, about how the audience still loves her, about how she is still a star, where the line between acting and autobiography completely disappears. You are not sure if you are watching a character fall apart or a real human being processing decades of pain. That blurring of reality and fiction is what makes the performance so haunting and so unforgettable. Swanson later said in interviews that making the film was both one of the hardest and most freeing experiences of her career. She had to go to places inside herself that most people keep locked away. But she believed in the story. She believed it was important. She brought every ounce of her real experience to every single scene. The result was a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination and introduced her to an entirely new generation of audiences who had never seen her silent films. Life had imitated art, and then art gave life back. She did not just play the role, she had already lived it. Number 17. The swimming pool scene required an extraordinary camera trick. The opening of Sunset Boulevard is one of the most memorable images in cinema history. A man's body floats face down in a large, luxurious swimming pool. Police and photographers crowd around the edge. The camera looks down at the body from below, from underneath the surface of the water, looking up through the rippling blue water at the dead man above. It is haunting. It is beautiful. It is deeply strange. and filming it was an absolute nightmare. Billy Wilder and his cinematographer John F. Seitz knew they wanted that underwater shot. They wanted the audience to see the body from below, to feel like they were looking up from the grave. But shooting a camera through the bottom of a swimming pool in 1949 was not a simple thing to do. There were no waterproof cameras readily available. There was no established technique for this kind of shot. The solution they came up with was wonderfully creative and slightly ridiculous. They placed a large mirror flat on the bottom of the swimming pool. The camera was then positioned at the edge of the pool, angled to look into the mirror. The mirror reflected the image of the body floating above, and the camera captured that reflection. So what you are actually seeing in that famous shot is not the body film from below. You are seeing a mirror image, a reflection bounced up from the pool's floor. When you know this, the shot feels even more poetic. It is literally a reflection of death. It is an image caught in a mirror, which is itself a kind of metaphor for the whole film. A story about people who cannot stop looking at themselves, who are in love with their own reflections, who cannot move forward because they keep staring backward. The pool itself belonged to the mansion used for filming. It was a real pool on a real property. The water was cold. The setup took hours, and the final image lasted only a few seconds on screen, a few seconds of genius hidden beneath the water. Number 16. Buster Keaton, Anna Q, Nielsen, and H.B. Warner were all real, silent film stars. One of the most quietly devastating choices in all of Sunset Boulevard happens during a scene that many casual viewers might not fully appreciate. In the film, Norma Desmond invites a group of her old friends over to her mansion for a card game. These friends are referred to in the film as the Waxworks, a cruel nickname given to them by the young screenwriter Joe Gillis, who finds them ancient and out of touch. He says it almost like a joke, but the truth behind this scene is deeply moving. The actors playing these waxwork friends were not just any old performers. They were real legends of the silent film era. Buster Keaton, one of the most gifted physical comedians who ever lived, sat at that card table. Anna Q. Nielsen, a major star of the silent era, was there. H.B. Warner, who had played Jesus Christ in the 1927 film The King of Kings, was also present. These were real people who had once been as famous as anyone in the world, and now they were sitting in a movie playing forgotten has-beens at a card table. The layers here are almost unbearable when you think about them. The film is commenting on how Hollywood discards its legends, and to make that point, it actually brought in real discarded legends to sit in front of the camera. They were not playing a version of the truth. They were the truth. Whether they found this experience painful or cathartic is something that was never fully documented. But the fact that they showed up, that they said yes, that they sat down at that table and looked into the camera, that takes something. It takes either tremendous peace or tremendous strength, or perhaps both. Billy Wilder never drew attention to this fact in the film's marketing. He let it sit quietly in the picture, waiting for those who knew to recognize it. And when you do recognize it, the scene transforms completely. They were not playing forgotten stars. They were forgotten stars. Number 15. William Holden was not the first choice for Joe Gillis. William Holden is so perfect as Joe Gillis, the cynical, charming, slightly lost young screenwriter, that it is almost impossible to imagine anyone else in the role. But Holden was not the first person Billy Wilder called. He was not even the second or third. The road to casting that role was long, winding, and full of surprising names. Montgomery Clift was the first major actor seriously considered for the part. Clift was a rising star at the time, sensitive and intelligent, with a kind of wounded quality that would have brought something deeply interesting to the role. He actually agreed to do it. He read the script. He said yes. And then, just weeks before filming was supposed to begin, he backed out. The reason given publicly was that the romantic elements of the story, the relationship between a young man and a much older woman, made him uncomfortable. Some people speculated that the personal nature of the discomfort was related to things in Clift's own private life. Whatever the true reason, he withdrew, and the production was thrown into uncertainty. After Clift, the producers looked at other names. Fred MacMurray, who had worked with Wilder before on Double Indemnity, was considered. Gene Kelly's name came up. Even the idea of using a completely unknown actor was discussed. Then William Holden's name entered the conversation. Holden had been working steadily in Hollywood, but had not yet had his defining role. He was talented and handsome and capable of tremendous range, but he had not yet found the film that would show the world what he could really do. Sunset Boulevard became that film. What is fascinating is that Holden was reportedly nervous about the film's darker elements, particularly the scenes where Joe Gillis is kept by an older woman, essentially living off her wealth. He worried about how audiences would perceive the character. But Wilder convinced him that the character's self-awareness, his knowing exactly what he was doing and feeling ashamed of it, was what would make audiences connect with him rather than reject him. Holden trusted Wilder, and the result was the performance that made him a genuine star. The role that was almost lost found the actor who was born to play it. Number 14. Erich von Stroheim based his character on real experience. Erich von Stroheim played Max von Meyerling, Norma Desmond's devoted butler, who protects her from the truth, writes her fake fan mail, and watches over her with a love that is tragic and total. The character is unforgettable. But what makes the performance even more extraordinary is the layer of reality hidden underneath it. In the film, it is eventually revealed that Max was not always a butler. He was once a great film director. He discovered Norma Desmond. He made her a star. He loved her. And when their personal relationship ended, he remained in her life in the only way she would allow. As her servant. Now here is the remarkable part. Erich von Stroheim, the actor playing Max, was himself a legendary director from the silent film era. He had made some of the most ambitious and expensive films in early Hollywood history, including The Extraordinary Greed, which was originally filmed at a length of almost 10 hours. The studio cut it down brutally, and von Stroheim's career never fully recovered. He spent the later decades of his career working as an actor because he could no longer find opportunities to direct. So when von Stroheim stands in front of the camera as Max, a former director who gave up his power and his ambition for love, and who now serves the star he once created, he was drawing on something very real. He understood what it felt like to be a filmmaker whose greatest work was taken from him. He understood the quiet grief of a brilliant man working in a role far beneath his gifts. Billy Wilder knew this history. He cast von Stroheim deliberately, knowing that this layer of autobiography would seep into every frame. It did. Every time Max looks at Norma with that mixture of devotion and sorrow, you're watching something that goes beyond acting. The character's heartbreak was borrowed from the actor's own life. Number 13. The famous line was almost cut from the script. "All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up." It is one of the most famous lines in the history of cinema. If you mention it to almost any film lover anywhere in the world, they will know it immediately. It has been quoted, referenced, parodied, and celebrated for decades. It is the final line of the film, delivered by Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond drifts down the staircase toward the cameras, completely lost in her own delusion. And it almost did not survive to the final cut. During the writing process, Billy Wilder and his co-writer Charles Brackett went through multiple versions of the film's ending. The final scene, where Norma, having shot Joe Gillis, descends the staircase in front of the police and the newsreel cameras, believing she is filming her grand return to the movies, was always part of the plan. But the specific words of the final line changed several times. Earlier drafts had different final speeches for Norma. Some were longer, some were more overtly tragic. Some tried to explain her madness more clearly. In the end, Wilder understood that the power of the scene came not from explanation, but from simplicity. He stripped the language down. He let the action speak. And the final line, that quiet, terrible, beautiful request for a close-up, became the distillation of everything the film was about. Fame, delusion, longing, the desperate need to be seen. When Swanson delivered the line during filming, the crew on set went silent. It was one of those moments that everyone present understood was something rare. Even the people who had been working on the film for months felt the weight of it in a new way when she said those words and walked toward the camera. A line that almost disappeared became immortal. 7 words. The whole world felt them. Number 12. Cecil B. DeMille played himself. The famous director, Cecil B. DeMille, appears in Sunset Boulevard playing himself. This was not a small cameo. DeMille has a full scene of the film, a scene that is central to the story. Norma Desmond visits him at the Paramount Studios lot, believing that he has called her in to discuss a new film based on the script she has been obsessively writing. In reality, he has called her simply because he wants to borrow her vintage car for a production. He has no intention of casting her in anything. The scene between Swanson and DeMille is quietly heartbreaking. DeMille is warm and kind to Norma, but there is a gentleness in his manner that is actually a form of pity. He cannot bring himself to tell her the truth, and so he lets her leave, still believing in the dream. You can see on DeMille's face, even though he is playing himself and not a fictional character, the conflict of a man who genuinely cares about someone he cannot help. What makes this even more interesting is the real history between Swanson and DeMille. In real life, DeMille had actually directed Gloria Swanson in 6 films during the 1920s, when she was at the absolute peak of her fame. So the warmth in DeMille's eyes during that scene was not entirely manufactured. He was looking at someone he had worked with, someone he had known during her greatest years, someone whose journey from stardom to obscurity he had witnessed. Billy Wilder asked DeMille to participate partly because he needed a famous director who was still active, someone whose presence would underline the contrast between the working Hollywood of 1950 and the forgotten Hollywood that Norma represented. DeMille agreed, and his presence gives the scene a weight that no actor playing a fictional director could have provided. Real history made the fiction feel even more true. Number 11. The mansion was a real place with a dark history. The crumbling, enormous mansion where Norma Desmond lives was not built for the film. It was a real location, a real house, sitting on a real street in Los Angeles. The property was chosen very carefully because Billy Wilder needed a place that felt both grand and decaying. A house that had once been beautiful and now felt trapped in the past. The mansion used for most of the exterior shots was the J. Paul Getty Mansion on Wilshire Boulevard, though interior scenes were filmed on Paramount Studios sets built to match. The combination of real exterior and constructed interior was seamless, and most audiences had no idea they were seeing two different locations blended together. The house had a strange, melancholy quality that seemed almost too perfect for the story. It was large enough to feel palatial, but worn enough to feel abandoned. The garden was overgrown, the pool was dark. The architecture spoke of a different era, a time when Hollywood was younger and more innocent, before it had learned to discard its heroes. Wilder walked through the property on his first visit and knew immediately that it was the right place. He said later that the house itself seemed to understand what the film was about. There was something in the way the light fell through the dusty windows, something in the way the empty rooms echoed, that matched the emotional landscape of the story. The actual swimming pool used for the famous opening scenes was part of the property. Standing beside it, you could feel the theatrical loneliness of the place. It was a stage without an audience, a home without warmth, a palace without a kingdom. The house was eventually demolished. It exists now only on film. The building is gone, but its ghost remains on screen. Number 10. The original opening was completely different and much darker. The opening of Sunset Boulevard, as most people know, it begins with the body in the pool and the narration from beyond the grave. It is memorable and immediately unsettling. But Billy Wilder's original opening was something entirely different, something so dark and strange that it was actually filmed before being cut from the movie entirely. The original opening sequence was set in a city morgue. The scene showed a number of corpses lying on slabs, and the narration was delivered by all of them together. A kind of chorus of the dead, each one explaining how they ended up there. Joe Gillis was among them, and eventually the focus narrowed to his story. The idea was to create a kind of community of death, a reminder that everyone's story ends the same way, regardless of how glamorous or tragic their lives might have been. The sequence was filmed, it was edited, and then it was shown to a test audience. The response was immediate and unanimous. People laughed, not because the scene was funny, but because the concept was so strange and unexpected that nervous laughter was the only natural response. A group of dead people chatting in a morgue was too absurd for audiences to absorb emotionally, even if the intention was serious. Wilder recognized immediately that the sequence needed to go. He went back to the drawing board with the opening and arrived at the now iconic pool scene with its single narrator. The shift from many voices to one voice made all the difference. One dead man telling his story is haunting. A room full of dead people talking is accidentally comedic. The morgue footage was believed lost for many years. Some film historians have managed to track down partial records of it, but it has never been officially released. The version audiences almost saw was stranger than any of them could have imagined. Number 9. Norma Desmond's silent film clips are actually real. Throughout Sunset Boulevard, there are scenes where Norma Desmond projects her old silent films on a screen in her darkened living room. She sits and watches herself as a young woman, glamorous, radiant, adored, while Joe Gillis watches beside her, uncomfortable and a little sad. These scenes are some of the most emotionally powerful in the film. And here is the extraordinary thing. The silent film clips being projected on Norma's screen are actually real footage from Gloria Swanson's real silent films. When you watch Norma Desmond watching her younger self, you're actually watching Gloria Swanson watching Gloria Swanson. Billy Wilder obtained footage from Swanson's actual films, including clips from Queen Kelly, which had been directed by Erich von Stroheim. Queen Kelly had a complicated, painful history. It was never properly completed or released, largely because of creative conflicts between Swanson and von Stroheim during production. It was a film that represented, in real life, a kind of unfinished promise. Using that footage in Sunset Boulevard created a moment of layered meaning that is genuinely overwhelming when you understand it. On screen, you see Norma watching her own lost glory. Behind the screen, you see Gloria Swanson watching footage from a real failed project, sitting next to the real director of that failed project. The film that never finished became part of the film that became a masterpiece. Swanson reportedly did not speak much on the days those scenes were filmed. She sat quietly between takes. Nobody asked her how she felt. Some things do not need to be said aloud. The past was not recreated. It was retrieved. Number 8. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett ended their partnership over this film. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett were one of the greatest writing partnerships in Hollywood history. Together they wrote some of the most admired screenplays of the 1940s, including Ninotchka, Ball of Fire, and The Lost Weekend. They had worked together for years and had built something rare, a creative relationship built on mutual respect, genuine trust, and a shared vision of what movies could be. Sunset Boulevard ended all of that. The precise reasons for the breakdown of their partnership have never been fully explained by either man. What is known is that as the script developed and grew darker and more unflinching in its criticism of Hollywood, the two men began to disagree more and more sharply. Brackett was reportedly deeply uncomfortable with how harshly the film portrayed the film industry. He may have felt that the story went too far, that it was too cruel, too unsparing in its contempt for the world they both worked in. Wilder felt differently. He believed the story needed to be exactly as dark as it was. He was not interested in softening the edges or offering Hollywood a comfortable mirror. He wanted the real thing. The disagreements grew so serious that by the time the film was finished, the two men could barely be in the same room together. Brackett did not attend the film's premiere. Their professional relationship ended with the completion of Sunset Boulevard, and they never worked together again. The irony is that the film they could not agree on became one of the greatest achievements either of them was ever associated with. Their final collaboration before the partnership broke apart was the work that history remembered most. Their greatest creation was also their last goodbye. Number 7. The film was shot in just over 50 days. Given how rich and layered and technically ambitious Sunset Boulevard is, you might expect that it took many months to film. Grand old mansions, elaborate period details, complex emotional scenes, and that extraordinary opening pool sequence. It all feels like it should have required a long, careful, patient production. The entire film was shot in approximately 53 days. Billy Wilder was known for being extraordinarily well prepared before he began filming. He believed that a director's job was largely done in the writing and planning stages. If the script was right, if the locations were properly scouted, if the actors understood their characters fully, then the filming itself could move quickly and efficiently. He was not the kind of director who encouraged long, wandering improvisations or constant revisions on set. He knew what he wanted, and he went after it with focused precision. This discipline created a shooting environment that was intense but clear. The cast knew their lines. The crew knew their positions. Wilder moved through the schedule with confidence. Some scenes that feel incredibly complex on screen were actually filmed very quickly because every element had been worked out in advance with such care. The pool scene, that extraordinary legendary opening, was completed in a single day of filming. The mirror trick had been fully planned and tested before the cameras rolled. When the time came to shoot, the setup worked the way it was supposed to, and Wilder moved on. What this tells you is that the magic of Sunset Boulevard was not born on set. It was born in the long, quiet, difficult hours of writing and preparation that happened long before the first camera rolled. The movie felt timeless. The shooting was swift. Number 6. The film score reflected Norma's inner world. The music of Sunset Boulevard was composed by Franz Waxman, and it is one of the most celebrated film scores of its era. Waxman won the Academy Award for Best Score for this film, and it is easy to understand why. The music is strange and grand and slightly unbalanced, much like Norma Desmond herself. Waxman made a deliberate creative choice that was quite unusual. Instead of writing music that reflected a story being told from the outside, music that commented on events the way a narrator might, he wrote music that reflected the story from inside Norma's perspective. The score does not observe her madness from a safe distance. It enters it. It adopts her grandiosity, her delusion, her operatic self-regard. This means that when Norma walks down that staircase at the end of the film, the music does not play something tragic or mournful, something that tells the audience to feel sorry for her or to recognize how broken she is. Instead, the music plays something enormous and triumphant because from inside Norma's world, that moment is a triumph. She is not a broken woman descending to her arrest. She is a great star finally returning to the cameras she loves. The genius of this choice is that it forces the audience to experience the horror of her delusion from the inside rather than the outside. You are not watching her fall apart. For 30 seconds, you are feeling what she feels. And that is far more devastating than any amount of mournful, pitying music could ever be. Waxman also incorporated tango rhythms into several key scenes, giving the film an undercurrent of dangerous elegance, the sense of two people locked in a dance from which neither can escape. The music did not explain her madness. It joined it. Number 5. The film bombed with industry audiences. At first, you might think that a film which was eventually nominated for 11 Academy Awards and is now considered one of the greatest movies ever made must have been celebrated from the very first screening. You would be wrong. The earliest screenings of Sunset Boulevard were deeply polarizing, especially among the people who worked inside the Hollywood film industry. The film premiered at a special industry screening, attended by many of the most powerful people in the movie business. The response was not what Billy Wilder had hoped for. Many people were offended. Many felt attacked. The film's portrait of Hollywood as a place that discards its artists and rewards cynicism and compromise made a lot of important people in that audience feel personally criticized. Louis B. Mayer's famous reaction, his furious confrontation with Wilder after the screening, was the most dramatic expression of this discomfort, but he was not alone in his feelings. Many producers, studio executives, and powerful agents left that screening unhappy. Some spoke openly about how they believed the film was harmful, that would damage the public's love for Hollywood, that it was essentially a betrayal dressed up as art. Ordinary audiences, however, responded very differently. When the film was released to the general public, it was received with genuine admiration and emotional intensity. Viewers were moved and disturbed and fascinated. Critics wrote extraordinary reviews. The film built a reputation quickly, and the awards nominations followed. The gap between the industry's first reaction and the public's enthusiastic embrace tells you something important about the film. Sunset Boulevard told a truth that powerful people did not want to hear. But the audience heard it and recognized it and loved it for its honesty. The people it criticized rejected it. Everyone else understood. Number 4. Gloria Swanson did her own tango. There is a scene in Sunset Boulevard where Norma Desmond dances the tango with Joe Gillis. It is a peculiar scene, both romantic and uncomfortable, full of desire and power and unease. Norma is clearly in control. She leads, she commands the space, and she dances with a confidence and physical authority that is impossible to fake. She did not fake it. Gloria Swanson was a genuinely trained dancer who had studied movement and physical expression throughout her career in silent films. In the silent era, physical expression was everything. You could not rely on dialogue to communicate character. You had to do it entirely through your body, your face, your movement in space. The greatest silent film performers were all, in some way, trained in physical theater and dance. Swanson brought that physical intelligence to every scene in the film. But the tango scene is where it is most visible and most powerful. She moved with a precision and intentionality that went far beyond simply following choreography. She understood what the movement meant for the character. She understood that the tango was not just a dance, it was Norma's way of asserting herself, of reminding Joe that she was still magnificent, still vital, still worth following. William Holden, to his credit, was a capable enough dancer to keep up with her. But anyone watching the scene can feel the difference in their relationship to the movement. Holden is doing his best. Swanson is in her element. The scene was filmed on the set of Norma's mansion, using the enormous living room that the production designers had filled with the memorabilia of a fated career. Dancing surrounded by her own forgotten images, Swanson gave the scene an emotional resonance that went far beyond the choreography. She was not performing grace. She simply had it. Number 3. The script took nearly 2 years to write. Billy Wilder first began developing the idea that would become Sunset Boulevard sometime in the mid-1940s. The finished film was released in 1950. Between the first kernel of the idea and the final screenplay, the writing process took roughly 2 years of work. That is a long time, and understanding why it took so long helps you understand why the finished film is so precise and so carefully constructed. The original concept was quite different from what ended up on screen. Early versions of the idea involved a younger female character, not an aging movie star, but a young woman obsessed with a male Hollywood actor. The dynamic was almost reversed. As Wilder and Brackett worked through the material, the story shifted, evolved, and gradually found its true shape. The character of Norma Desmond went through many transformations. In early drafts, she was less sympathetic, more villain than tragic figure. The scripts became increasingly nuanced as the writers found their way deeper into the psychology of someone who has been abandoned by the world that once adored her. They began to understand that Norma was not simply a monster or a cautionary tale. She was a human being whose gifts had been used and then discarded, and whose response to that abandonment was a madness born from love. Joe Gillis also changed significantly through the drafts. Early versions of his character were more passive, more victim-like. The final version gave him a sharp, self-aware cynicism that made him both more interesting and more morally complicated. He knows what he is doing. He makes choices, and that makes his fate feel earned rather than merely tragic. 2 years of wrestling with the story produced something that felt effortless on screen. That is always the mark of the real work. Every easy word had been rewritten a dozen times. Number 2. The film defined what a narrator could be in cinema. When Sunset Boulevard was released, the use of a narrator in film was not new. Voice-over narration had been used in movies before. But what Billy Wilder did with narration in this film was genuinely revolutionary, and its influence can still be felt in storytelling today. The choice to have Joe Gillis narrate the story from beyond the grave, from the moment of his death, looking back at the events that led to it, created something that had rarely been attempted in mainstream cinema with such commitment and clarity. From the very first lines of the film, the audience knows that Joe is dead. The mystery is not whether he will survive. The mystery is how it happened and who he was and what it all meant. This is a fundamentally different relationship with the audience than most films create. Normally, when we watch a story, we are uncertain about the outcome. That uncertainty creates tension. Wilder removed that uncertainty entirely from the very beginning and then asked a more interesting question. If you know how something ends, can you still feel it? Can you still care? Can suspense and emotion exist even when the destination is already known? The answer the film gives is a resounding yes. Knowing that Joe dies does not reduce the power of watching his choices. In some ways, it increases it. Every decision he makes, every moment where he might have walked away from Norma and chosen a different life, lands with a weight it would not have carried if we did not already know the outcome. This technique, the dead narrator, the story told backward from death, has been borrowed, adapted, and reinvented by countless films and television shows since 1950. Some of the most celebrated storytelling of the decades that followed owes a quiet debt to the creative courage of Wilder's choice. He changed how stories could be told, and nobody forgot it. Number 1. The film was a love letter and a warning at the same time. At its heart, above all the technical achievements and the extraordinary performances and the legendary lines, Sunset Boulevard is a film with two contradictory feelings beating inside it at once. It is, on one hand, a blistering and unsparing critique of Hollywood, of the way the film industry treats human beings like products, uses them up, and discards them when their commercial value fades. This critique is made with clarity and anger and not a single soft edge. But on the other hand, the film is a love letter. It is a movie made by people who were deeply, passionately in love with cinema. Billy Wilder loved films. He had given his life to making them. The characters in this story, even the broken, deluded Norma Desmond, are people for whom movies are not just a career. Movies are the thing that gives life meaning. The art itself is sacred to them, even when the industry around it is corrupt. This is why the film does not feel simply bitter or cynical. It feels heartbroken. It feels like something written by someone who loves a thing deeply and is grieving what that thing has become. Norma Desmond is not a villain. She is a person whose love for cinema was used and abandoned. And there is something genuinely tragic about that, regardless of how mad she becomes. When the film was made, Hollywood was changing. Television was beginning to challenge the dominance of cinema. The old studio system was starting to crack. The great era of silent films was just 30 years in the past, close enough to feel recent, far enough to feel like another world. Wilder looked at all of this and made a film that honored the beauty of the art while refusing to look away from the ugliness of the industry. That combination, love and warning together, beauty and grief held in the same frame, is what makes Sunset Boulevard something that cannot be replaced. It told the truth, all of it, the beautiful part and the devastating part, side by side, inseparable. It loved what it criticized, and that made it immortal. Bonus fact: the forgotten scene that would have changed everything. There is a story about Sunset Boulevard that very few people know, and it lives in the space between what the film became and what it almost was. During the long process of writing and developing the screenplay, Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett wrote a scene that was fully drafted, discussed seriously, and then set aside. A scene that, had it been included, would have fundamentally altered the emotional experience of the entire film. The scene involved Joe Gillis before his death making a phone call. In this version of the story, there was a moment, a quiet, private moment, where Joe reached for the telephone and came very close to calling someone who could have helped him. A friend. An editor at a magazine who had offered him honest work. Someone who represented the real world outside the gilded, crumbling mansion on Sunset Boulevard. In this version, Joe got as far as dialing. He may have even heard the line connect. And then he hung up. The scene was meant to underline that Joe's tragedy was not simply bad luck or bad circumstance. It was a choice, a series of choices, moments where he could have left and did not. The phone call would have made that theme explicit in a way that the finished film leaves implicit. It would have placed the moral weight squarely on Joe's shoulders and asked the audience to sit with that. Wilder ultimately decided not to use it. His reasoning, as best as can be reconstructed from later interviews and accounts, was that making Joe's complicity too obvious would shift the audience's sympathy away from him too completely. He needed the audience to feel something for Joe, not to excuse him, but to understand him. If the scene showed Joe deliberately choosing Norma's world over honesty and freedom in too clear a way, some audiences might stop caring about what happened to him. By leaving the choice more ambiguous, by showing Joe sliding deeper into the situation gradually, without a single decisive turning point, Wilder kept the character morally complex rather than simply guilty. Joe becomes someone who drifts, who makes 100 small compromises rather than one big dramatic one, and that is ultimately a more truthful and more disturbing portrait of how people lose themselves. The phone call scene exists only in the drafts. It was never filmed. But knowing it was written and considered, knowing that Wilder thought deeply about how much to show the audience and how much to leave in shadow, tells you everything about the level of care and intelligence that went into every single decision this film made. Sometimes the scenes that never make it to screen are the ones that quietly shape everything around them. The space where that phone call was not made echoes through the whole film, invisible and essential. The story he chose not to tell made the story he told more powerful. Sunset Boulevard is 75 years old, and yet nothing about it feels old. The questions it asks, about what we sacrifice for success, about what happens to people when the world stops looking at them, about the difference between art and fame, are questions that feel just as urgent and just as painful today as they did when Billy Wilder first put them on screen in 1950. What makes this film special is not just its brilliant filmmaking or its remarkable performances, though both of those things are extraordinary. What makes it special is its honesty. It refused to comfort anyone. It refused to offer easy answers. It looked at a world it loved and told the truth about that world with both tenderness and unflinching clarity. Gloria Swanson, William Holden, Erich von Stroheim, and all the real-life legends who passed through that crumbling mansion gave something irreplaceable to this film. They gave their real selves, their real history, their real pain, their real understanding of what it means to live in a world that measures your worth by your last performance. Sunset Boulevard reminds us that behind every screen, every spotlight, and every legend, there is a human being, fragile, hopeful, desperate to be seen. And that is not just a Hollywood story. That is everyone's story. Thank you for spending this time exploring the secret life of a truly unforgettable film. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.